Captain Ibrahim Traoré is under fire again, but not where you might expect. This time, the heat isn't coming from his own country, Burkina Faso. It's coming from the streets of Paris. Yes, Paris. The capital of France, a former colonial power, is now the unlikely epicenter of protests against a West African leader. That fact alone raises a huge question. Why is the outrage being voiced in France instead of Ouagadougou, where Traoré has publicly declared that citizens are free to protest, even against him? This goes beyond a protest. It reveals something deeper, something painful, a pattern Africa knows all too well. Foreign interference, hidden influences, promises of democracy that turn into betrayal. It's a cycle that has repeated itself for generations. But before we dive deeper, let's ask the basic questions that so few headlines are willing to explore. Who are these protesters in Paris? What are they really demanding? And most importantly, why now and why there? If you're tired of surface-level news and want to dig into what's really going on behind the scenes, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because today's video uncovers the story the mainstream media isn't telling you. Let's start with the obvious. France is the same country that Captain Ibrahim Traoré has publicly accused of trying to maintain its grip on African nations through military presence, economic tools, and political influence. He hasn't been vague about it either. He's been brutally honest. In one of his recent speeches, he directly called out France, demanding they leave Africa alone and let the continent define its own destiny. And then just days later, a small group of Burkinabe protesters showed up, not in Ouagadougou, but in Paris, holding signs that labeled Traoré a dictator. They called for a so-called return to democracy. But the timing was interesting, because not long before this protest, Traoré gave a speech that didn't just resonate, it electrified. It was raw, it was emotional, and it hit hard. Across Burkina Faso, people cried. Why? Because it wasn't just another political statement, it was truth. Truth that had been buried for too long. In that speech, Traoré asked, "Is our crime that we want to fix our hospitals? That we're trying to give our children better schools? That we're supporting our farmers with affordable fertilizer and free plowing? Is it because we're building roads and railways to connect our nation?" And then, with fire in his voice, he dropped a line that echoed far beyond his borders. Everything we try to build is attacked, not just by foreign powers, but by our own people serving those powers. But we won't stop. We won't give up. History is on our side, and it always proves us right. That wasn't just a call to action. It was a warning to those who want to keep Burkina Faso weak and divided. Let's not forget, Traoré didn't rise through elections. He came to power in September 2022 by ousting the interim president, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. From that moment, it's been nothing but turbulence. Reports, though unconfirmed, claim he survived up to 18 assassination attempts. Even if that number is exaggerated, the fact that any attempts have happened speaks volumes about the resistance he's facing. This isn't just opposition from abroad, it's from within. Elites in the military, political figures, and power brokers who feel deeply threatened by a young man who refuses to play by the old rules. He's kicked out French troops, ended military cooperation with France, and begun rewriting the narrative of his country's independence. By early 2023, Burkina Faso had expelled French diplomats and military forces. Crowds flooded the streets of Ouagadougou, waving Russian flags and chanting, "France out!" The people had spoken. They wanted a new chapter. But again, why Paris? Why would Burkinabe citizens living thousands of miles away choose France, a former colonizer, as the place to protest a man many in their homeland view as a liberator? The answer might not be as simple as it seems. France has long been accused of using political, military, and economic tools to retain influence over its former colonies. Captain Traoré has not been shy about saying so. In a fiery speech in January 2025, he called out President Emmanuel Macron directly. He said France has no right to expect thanks for its so-called fight against terrorism. He went further, accusing Macron of insulting African dignity and urging African nations to decolonize their minds, not just their borders. That's strong leadership, honest, blunt, dangerous. So why is a small group of Burkinabe in Paris calling for Traoré to step down in the name of democracy? The same democracy that, for decades, left their homeland impoverished, dependent, and in chaos? Ask yourself, who benefits from these protests? Who funds them? Who gains if Traoré is removed? Because make no mistake, this is more than politics. It's a battle for Africa's soul. Despite what critics claim, Traoré hasn't cracked down on dissent. On the contrary, he's said time and again that the people are free to protest, even against him. But when those protests move from the streets of Ouagadougou to the boulevards of Paris, it raises red flags. Are these protests really organic? Or are they influenced by outside forces, foreign interests that see Traoré's independence as a threat? History gives us clues. Think of Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Muammar Gaddafi. All of them branded dictators by Western powers, not for oppressing their people, but for empowering them, for putting Africa first, for demanding sovereignty over their own land and resources. And now Traoré is walking that same tightrope. He studied the past. He knows what happened to Sankara, Burkina Faso's own revolutionary icon who renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Sankara launched radical reforms, land redistribution, women's rights, healthcare, education, and he paid the price. In 1987, he was assassinated in a coup many suspect was backed by foreign forces. Traoré has learned from that history. He isn't just an idealist, he's a strategist. He's building new alliances with nations like Russia, China, and Turkey. He's refused to play the old colonial games. He's kicked out biased media outlets and extended olive branches to former rivals, like General Gilbert Diendéré, in an effort to unite the military and crush the insurgencies tearing the country apart. Of course, he has critics. They accuse him of delaying democracy, pointing out that elections originally scheduled for 2024 are now postponed to 2029. But supporters flip that question around. What has democracy, when designed and imposed by the West, actually done for Burkina Faso? Past governments, though elected, left the country buried in poverty, dependent on foreign aid, and vulnerable to endless conflict. In April 2025, Traoré sparked another firestorm by saying, "No country has developed under democracy." Controversial, yes, but maybe he's onto something. Maybe what Burkina Faso needs right now isn't another Western-style election. Maybe it needs sovereignty, real, grounded, self-made sovereignty. And that's why this moment is so important. If those protesters in Paris really cared about Burkina Faso's future, they wouldn't be chanting for vague elections. They'd be demanding the end of the CFA franc. They'd be fighting for economic freedom, for local control over African land, labor, and resources. But instead, they're echoing the same slogans that have kept Africa in chains for decades. But things are changing. The spirit of Thomas Sankara still lives. The fire of Patrice Lumumba burns in Traoré's vision. The dream Gaddafi once had of a strong, self-reliant, united Africa is starting to awaken. Just imagine, Africa is the richest continent on Earth, rich in minerals, rich in talent, rich in people, and yet still asking for aid, still tied to help that always comes with strings. Why? Because we've been divided, because fear has been weaponized, because unity has been discouraged. Let the protests happen in Paris. Let the backroom deals be made. Let the old world panic, because Burkina Faso has chosen its path, and Africa is wide awake. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think? Is Traoré a dictator or a freedom fighter? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening. Thanks for tuning in.